Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما رب العالمين ربنا أعنا على ذكرك وشكرك وحسن عبادتك. So, preserving the Islamic identity. Before I start, someone suggested, he said, ask your audience, what is the Islamic identity? So I'm going to follow that advice. So what is an Islamic identity? Like if you hear it, and I know it's sometimes hard to define it. I mean, you hear things, you know what they mean, or we think we know what they mean, but it's when someone asks you to define them, that's very different task. So if we say an Islamic identity, what do we mean by an Islamic identity? Okay, so following the Islamic religion, the Islamic teachings, and presenting ourselves as Muslims, right? So that's a very comprehensive answer, that's what an Islamic identity from, and we will see, inshallah, that is true. Somebody else, right? Oh, okay. So, do we have to listen to them, or? Okay, yeah, somebody needs to, okay. Yeah. Sure. So we'll wait.
We'll have a few words of advice, inshallah. We'll do a few words of advice to husband and wife soon to be in a few minutes, inshallah.
You get to hear the matrimony, the holding. Huh? Yeah, you'll know all the details.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. فسبحان الله حين تمسون وحين تصبحون وله الحمد في السماوات والأرض وعشيا وحين تظهرون يخرج الحي من الميت ويخرج الميت من الحي ويحيي الأرض بعد موتها وكذلك تخرجون ومن آياته أن خلقكم من تراب ثم إذا أنتم بشر تنتشرون ومن آياته أن خلق لكم من أنفسكم أزواجا لتسكنوا.
Yeah? Okay. We still have sound here? Yeah. Okay. So our basic understanding of the Islamic identity is one that it is based on an Islamic religion, a reflection of the teachings of Allah Azza wa Jal. And that is very true, inshallah. So that we can say that's the essence of the presentation, but inshallah we want to understand it in a little bit more detail. So what we hope, inshallah, to understand when we come out from this lecture is basically one, what is an identity and why is it important, and what is an Islamic identity and how to preserve it. So those are the first questions. It's a very ambitious and a very broad task and a project, but inshallah this is just an introduction. And as you inshallah research it more and try to apply whatever you learn, inshallah more and more of that will be apparent bi'idhnillah azza wa jal to us. So, an identity. What is an identity? So I thought of an example, but you can think of so many other examples where identities manifest themselves. So, trying to pick a restaurant. So, think of a group of friends. non-Muslims, we're just talking about a group of friends, and they're trying to pick a restaurant where they're going to go and eat. So someone says, well, I can't eat in that restaurant because I'm a vegetarian. They don't have vegetarian options, so I cannot eat there. The other person says, well, I can eat meat, but they have not subscribed to a source of meat that is merciful or kind in its treatment of animals. So I can't eat because they are cruel to animals and animal slaughter, so I can't eat in that particular restaurant. Or someone who says, that's not really my concern, but the type of meat that they're offering religiously, I cannot eat. Or somebody says, the only problem I have with the restaurant is that the owner supports a cause financially that goes against what I believe. So I choose to boycott that restaurant because of this. Now all of these people have expressed part of their identity in informing their decision to eat in a place or not to eat there. So you can take any other example, whether it's voting, traveling, life choices. All of these are informed and guided by a sense of identity that you have. Basically, a quality important enough to define you. If you ask yourself at this moment, who am I? Ask yourself, who am I? The answer that you're going to come up with is most likely your identity or part of that identity. I am this. Okay? This is how I understand myself in the world today. I am this. I'm not that, but I am this. A quality important enough to define you. Basically, that is your identity. Now we have multiple. Some people talk about multiple identities. And we do have different identities, but not all of them are important. So you can define yourself completely or partially in terms of your profession. I'm a doctor, I'm a teacher, I'm a lawyer, I'm an engineer. That could be really important to you or not. In type of your ethnicity or race, color, gender, religion, political affiliation, parent, child, grandparent. All of these are fragments of our identities. But as you can see, not all of them are important, or not all of them are important to all people. So, an identity is something important, but they vary in importance. And they can be congruent or incongruent because these multiple identities that I have, they could clash with each other, or sometimes they don't. So for instance, if I have a religious identity, there are certain things that I cannot be, certain professions that I cannot accept, right? Certain other things I can do. If I'm a person of color in some societies, there are certain things that you cannot do. You're not going to be hired. You're not going to be able to climb the economic ladder. You cannot be rich. You cannot be free. So there are certain identities that clash. If I am a professional, could I be a father at the same time? Can I be a mother at the same time? So does parenthood clash with my identity as a professional person? So whenever there is contradiction, you'll try to negotiate to find either a compromise or put one identity ahead of the other. That tells you what's important and what's not. With me so far, right? Okay. Now, types of identities. Okay? Now there is core and tangential, meaning that there is an important one and one that is really not that important. And if you investigate your own identities, you'll find those. So for some people, gender is really an important identity. Through gender, I understand my interactions with others, and through gender, I understand the entire world around me, including religion. For other people, gender is not an important identity. Yes, it does influence choices and behavior, but it's not the first thing I think about when I think about myself. Religion for some people is core identity, for other people it's not. Political affiliation, I'm liberal, conservative, traditional, that matters and allows me to understand the world around me, and this is how I see myself. There are those that are by choice and those that are by birth. Do you have an example of identity by birth? I'm going to engage you so that I at least make sure that you're still with me. Identity by birth, yeah. Exactly, the place that you're born in, which could translate into your citizenship in a country. So for a lot of people, I'm born into this country, born into this culture, and born into that citizenship. But citizenship also could be an acquired identity. You could be naturalized. So it could be this, or it could be that. Culture, you can be born into a culture, or you can adopt another culture, and if you're accepted, that becomes your culture as well. Other identities by birth. Come on. Race, your color, right? Can't escape that. Race, who your parents are. If it's a culture, which culture you come from. Sometimes religion. You're born into a religion, right? So some of them are by choice, by birth. Now, some by choice. Give me an example. So I chose this identity. Migrating to a country, right, and becoming a citizen like a Canadian citizen, right? Religion, exactly. When you choose it, right, convert into another religion, or you choose to adopt the religion of your parents and actually practice it, that's choice. Right? Profession, yeah. Language, right? So you're linguistically connected to these people or those people. You can learn a language and that will connect you to them. And that could become an identity of yours as well, or could affect your identity. So some we're given and some we acquire. There's personal and collective. And the personal is always connected to the collective. So you think about it, who am I? When I asked you to think about it, who am I? So what answer you can come up with? I'm male, I am female, I'm talented, I'm skilled, I'm knowledgeable, I know this and I know that. This is what? Personal. But you also are part of a collective identity. So I'm male, but I'm also part of a group of males. Or a female, part of a group of females. I'm also part of a family, part of a culture, part of a country. So always personal identity is connected to a collective identity, and they do influence each other. Permanent and temporary. So what is an example of a permanent identity? Meaning that you cannot run away from it. Exactly. So your creed can be permanent. Okay? Or could be also temporary if you decide just to switch faith. So what's an example of a permanent or a temporary identity? Political affiliation, right? That can change. Exactly, right? So something that is permanent, we can say again, like you've said, race or ethnicity, right? That's permanent. Gender, that's permanent. That cannot be changed. Temporary, profession. So I'm a doctor, so if I see myself as a doctor, I think of myself as a doctor, I behave as a doctor, I associate with other doctors, there's going to come a time when I stop being what? A doctor. I'm not practicing anymore. So that's not a permanent identity, right? Even if I still espouse or still continue thinking of myself as a doctor or a teacher or what have you, that is not going to last forever. And comprehensive versus partial. This is connected to core versus tangential. Comprehensive means that this identity affects and informs everything else, whereas partial one is only partial. So any of the identities that we talked about could be comprehensive if you choose to stress them enough. Religion could be a comprehensive identity, right? It affects everything. Or only partial. I'm religious only here, but not elsewhere. So it could be a partial identity. Profession could be comprehensive, meaning I think of myself first as this person. I think as an engineer. I act as an engineer, right? It has changed the way that I think, but also the way that I interact with people and the way that I accept truth and falsehood. So I analyze everything as an engineer. So it can be a comprehensive one. I could be a vegetarian, and that could be a comprehensive identity that affects my stance, political stance, not only where I eat, but my political stance, and even the people that I associate with. It could be comprehensive or it could be partial. Congruent versus incongruent, meaning that whether my identities clash with each other or not. Right? What do we mean, or what do we want from Islam to be an Islamic identity? We want it to be a core and permanent and comprehensive identity. A core identity meaning it's the important or the most important identity that I have, the quality that I have, that when I define myself as being a Muslim. That's the first thing that comes to mind, and it supersedes and transcends all other identities. Even though they are allowed to exist, you're still male and female, you're still a doctor and a teacher, right? You still belong to this culture and that culture, but what is the core one? The one that you think of first when there is a clash, it's that core identity. And it's permanent, meaning that commitment is not temporary, that commitment is forever, until death. So it's a solid commitment to it. And comprehensive. And what do we mean again by comprehensive? Yeah. Affects all your choices. So there is no area where Islam is not allowed in. It affects everything. So the way that you think and see yourself, the way that you behave, you're always asking yourself, how does Islam teach me to behave? How does Islam teach me to practice? So we want the Islamic identity to be core, permanent, and comprehensive. Now the foundations of an Islamic identity, okay, that identification with Islam is one, an awareness of Allah Azza wa Jal. Right? That I'm always connected to the Creator. And as we're going to see, inshallah, it's because Allah is the one who gave that identity. So I'm always aware of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this identity is not a tribal identity. What do I mean by that? It's not that we are Muslims simply because we were born Muslims and because I need you and you need me. Just like a national identity. I was born into this country, and so we have affiliation because I simply was born or I was naturalized. I need you, you need me, we happen to be here, and we're not other people. That's not it. It's an identity based on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and what Allah loves, and also avoiding what Allah hates. So awareness of Allah at all times. And that's what makes it different and unique. It's a hereafter focused. Meaning my objectives are not limited to this life. It's not simply or only about what do I gain here, but what I gain in the hereafter. So the scene of this world and the hereafter in my mind as a Muslim are the same scene. They're not disconnected. And so that will affect my choices. As sometimes when we are disconnected from the hereafter, we want to win here. But if we have the hereafter in mind, we can tolerate loss here for the sake of gain when we meet Allah Azza wa Jal. That's the concept of sacrifice, which we will talk about. So sacrifice comes why? Because I'm aware of Allah Azza wa Jal and the reward of the hereafter when I sacrifice for His sake. The third one, the parameters of that identity. You say, okay, how do I know how to be a Muslim? How do I identify as a Muslim? You say the halal and the haram are the parameters and borders of that identity. What do I do and what do I stop doing? How do I behave? What defines me as a Muslim has already been revealed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you want to know how to be, that's the halal. The commands of Allah Azza wa Jal, what He loves, that's what it is. What not to be is what Allah Azza wa Jal hates. And in addition, of course, to having this guidance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this identity is modeled by Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. So he defines how to be a Muslim, how to live as a Muslim in different facets of life. So as a husband, as a leader, as a wife, as a son, as a father, as a statesman. The definition of a Muslim and that Islamic society and the Islamic identity is provided by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and then modeled and followed by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Now, why is an identity important? And the question here is, Maybe you haven't thought really about it, but can you ever live without an identity? Because you simply, when we say identity, we say definition. Can you as a human being live without a definition? No, absolutely not. The first thing that you can ask yourself, right, as a human being is, who am I? This question, who am I, is your identity. And if you ask yourself right now, who am I? The answer will be your identity. So we all need personal definition. I'm part of this group, but I'm not part of that group. I believe in this, but I do not believe in that. That's an identity. So it's inescapable. It's inescapable. And the world today, a lot of the reaction that you have against globalization is an identity crisis that some people are facing. That's in the face of globalization, where the world is supposed to be one single entity, some people are still searching for that identity. So they push back against globalization with national identity, or racial identity, or religious identity, because they feel lost. Whether there is justification for it or not, but they feel lost. So all of us, all the time, are looking for what defines us. That's a personal identity. So we need to belong. Can you live as an island, as an individual without any attachment? Ever? No. You need others to give you definition. So you need to belong. I belong to this group, but not to that group. And that also, my identity, lets me know how I'm supposed to react to the rest of the world around me. What's right and what's wrong. So who's going to give that definition? That's an important definition. In addition, or second to, my definition of myself, who am I, is this: what do I do? Do I accept this or not? Do I allow those people into my country though they are different? Do I accept them? Although they have a different language, they have different beliefs, and what happens to my identity if I let them? So my understanding of my own identity, whether it's French, whether it's English or European or North American, determines whether I want to allow those people in or not. Right? And if I feel that my identity is threatened, I will keep him out. I'll shut him out. And that interprets the French or the Quebec anxiety about their identity. Because they feel that they're under threat. Not from Muslims necessarily, but from the rest of Canada. English Canada. And so when Muslims come, that's just an extra threat. A questioning of what it means to be French in a non-French speaking country. So you need to belong, but this is also how you understand the world around you. It gives you belief and it gives you practice. So, right, wrong. And then how do I respond to this right, or how do I fight that wrong? Do I want open trade, or do I close my borders? Does it help me or not? Do I allow the government to be big or small? Do I allow religious freedom or not? All these questions are questions of identities. Mine and theirs, and what I allow to tolerate or not. Right? Now, challenges to a Muslim identity. Why is it difficult? Okay. The first is the secular. And the secular, so Abdul Wahhab al-Misiri defines it as secular, or divides it as complete and partial, right? As one definition. The complete secular that he defines is a secularism that wants to banish religion. That's more of the French model. So a secularism that wants to banish religion from all of society, even public space. So it's antagonistic to religion. There is partial secularism, and that partial secularism only wants to separate religion from governance. Then it allows the religious to function or to worship freely, but they're not allowed, or religion is not supposed to direct governance. But the complete one just wants to banish religion altogether, even from the public sphere. But what is important for us about religion, or about that secular move, is that the secular in general, whether it's complete or partial, empties society from reference to God. And from the beginning with the Enlightenment up till today, in the West, beginning in Europe and then moving into North America, there is a move away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or a move away from God, where God becomes less and less relevant to life, does not define it, does not guide it. And in time, religious beliefs and God subhanahu wa ta'ala are looked down on and ridiculed. So you can tell someone, for instance, you can justify your position in society today, in many Western countries, in secular terms, and you'll be respected, but not in religious terms. You can't say, I'm avoiding this because of Allah Azza wa Jal. That to them is not intelligible. That to them is backward. But if you say in terms of science, in terms of benefits and harms, physical benefits and harms, you'd be listened to and respected. But not the religious choice. Not Allah Azza wa Jal, not God. Well, that's looked down on and actually made fun of. So why is it hard to maintain an Islamic identity? Because you are fighting that current, and it's a very strong tide, and you're saying, I'm doing this for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jal, and for centuries now, they've been telling themselves and others that this is irrelevant. So you're standing against the tide. And sometimes you're standing alone. So the public sphere or society is God-free, but you are reintroducing God in it. So to stand up and say, this is because God told me, or the Prophet ﷺ said so, seems alien and foreign. That's reason number one. Reason number two is that with that secular move, there is that individual move. Individualism. Humanism. Where the person, or the West in general, has severed connection between earth and the heavens, so that we now understand what benefits us and harms us. We don't need a higher power to tell us. So the way that we're going to govern ourselves is the way we decide to govern. The way we organize our society, what is right and what is wrong. We're not waiting for an external source to tell us right and wrong, but we're going to do it based on our own interests. This is secular. And we're going to reduce the authority to the individual. You as an autonomous individual will get to decide what is right and what is wrong. Right? So you are separating between heaven and earth, and you're separating between individual and community. So that's why you will hear someone, even Muslims sometimes, will come and tell you, so what's wrong with it if I'm not harming anybody? So where is this coming from? It's coming from, did I put authority, or does that? Okay, so personal morality. Coming from appropriating authority to your own self. That is, I decide what's right and what's wrong. Right? It's up to me. Disconnected from a higher power and disconnected from community. And if I don't see anything wrong with it, or if those people are really not harming anybody by it, then it should be okay. So it's left up to the individual to decide what's right and it's what's wrong, divorced from Allah Azza wa Jal, divorced from the community itself, and assigning authority to the individual as individual. The status of being a minority also makes the practice of Islam and an Islamic identity very difficult, or at least challenging. Right? So, assimilation is what the majority requires from minorities. Okay? In a lot of countries. Whether it's spoken or not, we need you to assimilate. And what does assimilate mean? You're asking me. You mix. You mix in a way where you leave out what is distinctively yours, and you adopt what the majority has done, has said, what the majority believes. So you don't stand out. So assimilation from the majority, okay, or the majority requires assimilation from that minority. So if the minority stands out, of course there will be a price for that. Marginalization, to be stigmatized, to be criticized, to feel alienated, and all of that. That puts a pressure on the minority to imitate. So how do you escape that scrutiny of the majority, of being different? What do? You start imitating. You start imitating first intellectually, you start believing the things that they tell you, and secondly, you start imitating in practice. Right? And they say, Ibn Khaldun has famously said, Al-Maghlubu abadan mula'un bitaqlid al-ghalib. He says the defeated always is fascinated or attracted to imitating the victor. So if you see yourself as weak, and that was the problem when Muslims when they were colonized, but if you see yourself as weak and your enemy as superior and stronger, there is this natural inclination within you to imitate the powerful. So if you feel inferior, and that's what the pressure of being a minority does. If you feel less, because you're always being criticized and targeted and blamed and attacked, so you start slowly absorbing that mentality, right? And when you absorb that mentality, if you accept it, you become defeated. And if you are defeated, well, nobody likes to feel that. So you start changing. Changing not to look like the attacked minority, but closer to the victors, the dominant. And that is where imitation comes. So why do we imitate? Why is it easier not to stand out? Because I don't want the criticism. I don't want to feel less than everybody around me. Worldly attractions. I thought maybe that could be a reason. Why does it hinder an Islamic identity? That in order for you actually to, this is even global, in order for you to stand up as a Muslim, there are certain principles that you need to apply. You become serious, about life, about family, about society. But the world around you, just like the next slide says, is very trivial and foolish. So what is more interesting and attractive, to be fashionable or modest? Which one? Fashionable, right? It's like if to be modest, I want to put on the hijab. I don't want to put on, this and that when I leave, or for males to be responsible and to be serious and to not waste time and not play games and not... Well, that's difficult to do in a world that is or encourages that type of behavior and glamorizes it and wants more of it. Why do you want more of it? Because you could get to sell more products when you are trivial. If you're not as foolish, you're not going to buy as much. You're not going to be deceived by their marketing, campaigns. So why is it a problem? Because the world attracts you, and when the world attracts you, it takes you away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's harder and harder to practice Islam, harder and harder to be serious. And so there's a competition between an Islamic identity and a capitalistic or a consumerist identity that only cares about profit or cares about buying and getting more of this world. And in general, this is what I mean by being trivial. If you want to be serious, not only religiously, not only talking about religion, but serious about life, serious because you say, okay, the environment is in danger, I need to do something about it. I don't have time to waste on other trivial things. Well, that is a serious choice to make, and there'll be a cost to it. Its cost is you're not going to be as ridiculous or foolish as the rest of your friends are. You'll stand alone. And that is not always easy. Now, features of an Islamic identity. What makes it different from a lot of other identities or all other identities? The first one is that it's the only one that helps in both worlds. Right? So if you are a Muslim here, you're also Muslim where? When you meet Allah Azza wa Jal. That identity continues with you. Does any other identity continue? Think about it. Any other identity, except the opposite of being non-believer, that continues. But any other identity? There is that relationships, right? But some people run away from their relatives on the Day of Judgment, right? So even that is broken. And some maintain, but that is broken, some of them. But an identity that is never disconnected, an identity that is always preserved. Any other identity? Yeah, well, that's part of it, right? That's part of it. But that's the only one that continues from here to over there. And that makes it very unique. That is, if you preserve this one and grow it here, it's going to help you over there. But whatever other identity you ascribe to, you cultivate, you grow, once you die, it goes. Unless it somehow is connected to this. Meaning, you've been a teacher and you've been doing it for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jal, it gets added to your bank account over there of good deeds. But any other identity does not matter. So you stand before Allah Azza wa Jal not as your profession or race or gender. You stand before Allah Azza wa Jal as simply whether you are a Muslim or you're not. So that's the only identity that actually lasts. It's Allah given. So who gave it? The answer is there, right? So every other identity, well, you say, well, it's gender is Allah given, isn't it? Race is Allah given, but it's not important. It does not, Allah Azza wa Jal does not look at your bodies. But He looks at your hearts. So this identity, which an identity by choice, by the way, is Allah given. Huwa sammakum al-muslimin. He is the one who had given you the name of Muslims. So many other identities that are by choice are human-made. We're going to become the Canadians, the French, the British, the Americans, whatever, but we made up those identities. These will evaporate when we die. I would belong to the liberals, conservatives, this and that. These are all going to evaporate. And some of these, I don't know, I think I will say that in the next slide. So these identities are not permanent and also not important, but this one is Allah given, and because it's Allah given, it's valuable. It's the most valuable one. Because Allah Azza wa Jal did not care enough to give you by name any other identity except this one. So if it is Allah given and valuable, that's the most precious one to have. And as a result, it's not exaggerated. A lot of other identities, they get puffed up for no good reason. We are the, right? And it's mostly false. Whatever comes after that is mostly false. We're always strong. We'll always defeat our enemies. We're proud. And a lot of it, especially national identities, are exaggerated. Fiction. This is not fiction. When Allah speaks about it, He speaks the truth. When He says you can do this, then you can do that. Balanced. Right? And we can say maybe couple balance with being noble. So balanced and noble. It means that this identity gives you the right balance in this life. The right balance meaning what? The right balance between your duties as a professional and as a family man or woman. Balance between whatever small affiliation you have and the larger affiliations that you have. Balance in everything because it is Allah given, and it is also noble. Noble in the sense that some identities, in order for them to thrive, they have to thrash another one. There is nothing within that identity to prevent them from committing atrocities and injustice towards others for them to form their own identity. It is when they want to form their own identity, they will secure their own rights, but trample the rights of others. And that's what you find, that there is conflict between people of different identities, because we stress ours over yours. But the balance of Islam says what? Justice throughout, even with your enemy. You cannot take things that do not belong to yours. Whatever you're going to stress not because you're a tribe that wants to win. You're going to stress because Allah Azza wa Jal told you this is halal and do it. And here you need to stop. So it's an identity that preserves the rights of others and produces eventually a balanced human being that does not put one emphasis on one thing to sacrifice another. And as we said, it's the most noble identity because it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who had given it, who had endowed it with all the character that a noble person needs to have. And it's stable, right? Because it is defined by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and secured through the revelation. It does not fluctuate. It's not less important today than it was before. We know what to do to develop that particular identity. I know halal, I know haram. What it means to be a Muslim has not changed till the time of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam. But what it means to be a Canadian, an American, a European has changed. What it means to be liberal and conservative has changed and will continue to change and evolve. But this one does not change. It does respond, and I think the last one I said, pragmatic. It does respond to reality, but there is a core belief and a core practice that never changes. At the same time that it's stable, it's also very pragmatic. It realizes that there will be different times and different places when you will not be able to do everything. And so Islam adjusts accordingly. Right? So Islam in Mecca wasn't like Islam in Medina, right? And Islam when Muslims are weak is not exactly as Islam when Muslims are strong. So Islam, or your practice of Islam if you're traveling, is not exactly like when you are a resident. There's always this pragmatism, flexibility within Islam, and so Islamic personality, to allow the Muslim to survive in any case, in any place, in any time, but within the core of Islamic beliefs and within the core of Islamic practices. Now, how do you preserve the Islamic identity, inshallah? So we're coming to the end of points of how you preserve the Islamic identity. First of all, knowing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the guide and that Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is the model. And you're not going to know this, like actually know this, until you learn Islam and become aware of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from you. So if I tell you, you need to be proud of being Muslim, what does that sentence mean to you? To know more about Islam. So if I haven't taught you much about Islam, and I'm telling the youth, be proud of being Muslim, what does that mean? Does it mean anything? Nothing. So that statement, the problem with that statement when you say just be proud of being Muslim, you said, but really proud of what? What do I know about it to be proud of? Do you simply want me to be proud of it because I was born Muslim? Proud of you guys? And proud of me being part of your group? So I can choose to exclude myself, which is easier, and be part of another group that is dominant, and I could be proud over there too, right? What is so special about you that I need to be proud of? Not until you actually learn Islam that you'll know what you need to be proud of or how to be proud. What is it that you are proud of? And that's why I said that you need to actually learn it. You need to attend courses, lectures, khutbahs. Like actually when you go to Jum'ah, actually listen and learn something new every single Friday. Okay. But seeking knowledge so that you understand Islam in detail, understand the beauty of Islam and why you deserve it, why it is valuable in detail, not slogans. Slogans don't matter, but in detail, why is it valuable? The external and the internal are connected, right? So after knowledge comes what? Application, right? So I can't say I know, and so I'm going to be proud. You're not going to know the beauty of salah until you do what? Till you do what? Pray. So I can tell you, and Allah Azza wa Jal says it in the Quran, the salah gives you this and gives you that. So knowledge-wise, I'll know. But you're not going to really know until you practice. With me? Right? Do you agree? So Islam is such a religion that you're not going to really know, what it is until you practice it. And sometimes until Allah tests you. And you rediscover the meaning of salah and other obligations that Allah Azza wa Jalla loves. Until you practice it. So what do we mean here? The external and internal are connected, is that once you know something, it needs to be manifested. It needs to be externalized. And also, it means that when we come to imitation, remember the statement that whatever you do on the outside will affect the inside as well. Right? So we need the application of Islam. And only then you can be proud of it. Proud of salah, proud of fasting, because now you understand through practice itself that it's beautiful. Okay? You need also, as we said, that you cannot be an island. You need to build a community around you. You need that attachment. And that's why they constantly talk about choosing your mate, choosing your spouse, right? Teaching your kids Islam. That's the building block of a community. Choosing your friends carefully. Being very, very selective about choosing your friends, even as an adult. But also selecting friends for your kids. Or if it's not friends, how do they spend most of their day? When they come back from school, what do they spend their day doing? If it's games and TV and internet, these are the friends of your children. And these are the friends that will shape your kids. That's not an Islamic influence. If you use it as an entertainment, you have to be selective and choose what fits their Islam. It's not going to corrupt them. But it goes back to the influence that your surrounding will have on you. So, families, friends, and then asking yourself and teaching your kids to ask themselves, who is your role model? Who do you look up to? Who do you want to be like? So if it's a rap star or a basketball player, you're on the wrong direction. Right? Because they are not supposed ever to be role models. Ever. They just do something well. Maybe not, but they just do one thing well. But they don't deserve to have the respect of a role model. But even ask yourself, really, who's my role model? That if I close my eyes and say, I want to be like so-and-so, who is it? Okay? And we know the answer, but I'm more interested in the actual answer. Who is really your role model? I want to be like this person. And that's the person that you will look and learn from. And so that's what you want to teach your children. But also teach yourself. Your role model tells you who you are. Okay? And if you're chasing after money, okay, or fame, or praise, then that's really not the Islamic objective. And we need to teach ourselves and our kids that there is something far more important and that exists beyond these trivial things. That's why I said the trivial is a competition for an Islamic identity, because you tell them, care about values, but the entire world cares about money. Now, how do you steer yourself away from this and into the serious? That's a struggle. But here is where the role of knowledge is important, and the role of practice is important, and the role of providing role models is important. Right? And building better and stronger and robust Islamic institutions. Because if we are fragmented, of course, we're easy prey. But if you can come together and your presence strengthens your neighbor and your neighbor's presence strengthens yours, then both of you will be better because of it. And you can build better or smaller communities even. So previously I talked about these nodes, right, in a bigger structure. I may come to the masjid and that is important, but also it's important to develop relations with other families. I and this family and this family and that family were very close, if you can find them. Our kids play together. We meet on regular basis. We keep ourselves strong. We study together. That also enhances the Islamic presence because it's a more intimate relationship, but you want to also try to bring this to the house of Allah Azza wa Jal, to Islamic centers, to make them even stronger and stronger. Remembering that the Prophet ﷺ said this, طُوبَى لِلْغُرَبَاء, good news to the strangers, that Islam started a stranger and will come back to being a stranger, and that doing the right thing is going to cost you at times. Teaching this to ourselves, but also to our kids from a very young age, that yes, doing the right thing sometimes is difficult, and you'll be the only person who's honest, the only person who prays, the only person who puts on hijab. But remind them that, why are they doing all of this? That they're doing this because of Allah Azza wa Jal, not because I'm asking you to. You're doing this because of Allah Azza wa Jal. So that's why when we talked about that the Islamic identity, what is its foundation? We said awareness of Allah. It's not social identification. Because that, when I lose the social pressure or gaze, I may behave differently. Follow what I'm saying? Like, if I'm around other Muslims, I'll behave Muslim. When no Muslim is around me, how will I behave? So if I behave Muslim because of Muslims, that's just a social pressure. But if my identity is based on Allah being aware of who I am, it doesn't matter then. So we have to instill in them the spirit of sacrifice and commitment, and focusing on that Allah will reward me in this life, in the hereafter when I sacrifice, not being interested in the reward of being accepted. Because then we will do whatever the crowd is going to do. And if we need to share with them, and then also with ourselves, stories of Muslims, living and dead, who were strangers in their times, and they committed themselves to Islam until their death, then we need to do so. Stories of Muslims today who, because they are Muslims, they're paying the price, yet still they have not sacrificed their Islam, then we need to do so. To understand that what you have is really valuable, and everything valuable is going to be challenged. But your recompense is what? Not here. You may see it here, but your focus is what? On the hereafter. And that's what gives that Islamic identity or Muslim identity strength and longevity. So imitation is a form of flattery and allegiance. Taqleed, tashabbuh. Right? So the inside and the outside are connected. You say, if you start dressing like someone, what does that say? What does that say? Tell me. You like him, right? Even if you say, I don't. Two things are true at this moment. One of them. Either you're lying, or in time you will like them. So when you start imitating someone externally, it's going to change you internally. Right? So either you are dressing like him, put on the same, jewelry like so-and-so, talking like so-and-so, because you admire him, and so you want to look like him. Or when you start adopting these words and that behavior and mannerism, you'll start liking that person. And you can see, even within ourselves, how sometimes when you change your own clothes, that affects your behavior. Doesn't it? New clothes versus old ones, dirty clothes versus clean ones. And that emotionally, psychologically affects you. Even the way that you talk to each other. Even though how you leave your house, what you wear affects you. That's why for someone who says, what is hijab? It's just a clothing, right? A piece of clothing that you put on your head. Is it? It affects you. Allah Azza wa Jal knows that it affects you. So when you leave your house with hijab or without hijab, there is a difference. And you lie to yourself if you say that there is no difference. Right? And even how people perceive you, that is also different. So if you imitate people, you're going to belong to them. And this is exactly what Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam says. مَنْ تَشَبَّهَ بِقَوْمٍ فَهُوَ مِنْهُمْ. If you imitate a people, you're one of them. Right? And see how beautiful that is. Yeah? That our Prophet was very direct. If you imitate a people, you're one of them. Meaning sooner or later, either you want to be one of them, so you already are one of them, or you're going to become one of them. Right? Now, and this we need to believe, that whatever Allah Azza wa Jal has commanded is always superior to any other human choice that runs counter to it. We have to believe in this and have confidence in whatever Allah Azza wa Jal had told us. Like, develop it, but it's not going to develop simply by saying I believe it. It's not only going to develop with knowledge and then practice. And then that conviction will settle into your heart because it's going to become part of you. And when it becomes part of you, you'll really believe that whatever Allah had chosen is the best, even when it contradicts your own desire. But Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, "Al-Islamu ya'lu wa la yu'la alayhi." Islam is superior, is top, and nothing goes on top of it, because it's Allah's command, Allah's choice, and any human choice cannot be as good as Allah's choice. I don't know if I've reached that. I think this is the last one. Oh, okay. Let me see. Okay. So we're coming to the end. This one is dua. To always remember that no matter how strong, no matter how knowledgeable, no matter how practicing you are, things may happen that may challenge you and shake your iman and test you. And if you don't ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for support at all times, He may not get that support. So don't rely upon yourself, your own achievement, but rely upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and ask Him to protect you from the fitan. So part of the dua of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is protection from the fitan, the upcoming fitan. And He said, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, there will be the types of fitan that they will reach such a degree that a person could be a believer in the morning and a non-believer at night, or a believer at night and non-believer in the morning. What is going to protect you from that fitna? Allah Azza wa Jal, and of course your past practice. But you need the protection of Allah Azza wa Jal. And lastly, remember the hereafter. Remember that Allah Azza wa Jal will reward you for those choices, for those sacrifices, for standing up for what Allah loves, for bearing those insults and criticism and those looks. So don't become weak because of it. Rather become strong and remember that you are and you will be in the company of the prophets of Allah, who all went through the same thing but never retreated. And yes, we are not prophets of Allah Azza wa Jal, but even those who came after the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam behaved in the same way and in the same fashion. They never retreated. So if your iman is valuable and you're looking for Allah Azza wa Jal to really reward you, wait for that in the hereafter, and you actually may see it in this dunya as well. So this, okay, yeah, it's a good time to stop, inshallah. So this is what I had to say about it, but inshallah I also want to hear from you, eager to hear your feedback and your questions, inshallah, so that we can enrich this discussion. Jazakumullahu khaira. Subhanakallahumma bihamdik. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant. Astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Alhamdulillah rabbil alamin. And I can keep standing for the questions. If they are written, or you can use this. Here's the mic. Alaikum salam.
All the norms of Islamic identity. You are very essential to know about that. But I understand from the lecture that Islamic identity should be common and it should be like unique for everyone, right? It should be same for all Muslims. But sometimes we are confronted with identity crisis. Like suppose for the moon cycle, I am celebrating Eid al-Sada and my brother is fasting in Scotland. So these are this identity crisis we face, and we are confronted with this situation all the time.
Good.
How to reconcile and combat all this kind of crisis?
Jazakallah khair. Jazakallah khair. So you've heard the question. So do I need to repeat it? Yes? Okay, so he's talking about an identity crisis where he says that an Islamic identity should be the same for everybody. But he cites the example here of differences in fasting. So a person could be fasting here, but in Scarborough a relative could be fasting a day later or having Eid on a different day. And that causes anxiety for some people. So how do we deal with this? And that's a good question, inshallah, because at the same time, though we say that Islamic identity, right, is supposed to be common, and we're supposed to be celebrating Eid at the same day and starting Ramadan on the same day, because these are markers of identity, right? They keep us together. But at the same time, we also recognize that the more that we learn, the more that our hearts will be open to accommodating legitimate diversity within Islam itself, without that shaking our iman or causing any panic. So, because there are legitimate differences when it comes to sighting the moon, and whether we are sighting locally or globally, whether we are basing it on calculation or not based on calculation, such fiqh diversity exists, and it had existed for more than 1,000 years. So even when you come to the time of the Sahaba of the Prophet ﷺ, there'll be some fiqh matters where they will disagree. But that never really compromised or jeopardized their own identification, Islamic identification, or brotherhood with each other. So the more that we learn, the more that you'll find, oh yeah, there is this diversity in fiqh. And so it's only natural that that diversity is going to manifest itself when it comes maybe to the beginning of Ramadan or to the end of Ramadan or other occasions. Ideally, you want to have the same day. Practically, it may not happen anytime soon because of these fiqh differences. But we still are enjoying most of Ramadan together, right? And some days in some years it's different Eid, but some other years it's the same Eid. So let's take what we can get, alhamdulillah, and whatever differences we have, at least we have more commonalities, but these differences can be accommodated, inshallah, without causing any panic. Because the more that you learn, the more you'll say, oh yeah, these differences have existed for a long, long time, and we're still Muslims, so it's not really anything new. But jazakumullah khair for that. Because I want to hear like what people are experiencing themselves on the ground that may cause, subhanAllah, some discomfort. Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
You talked about the fitan and the challenges that the new generation is facing in terms of the tangible and the non-tangible. Tangible, money, running after the money, right?
Money.
Problem is the issue here is the core issue is here is iman, the level of iman, which
Right.
varies. And from time to time, like to emphasize the quote from the Prophet say that in the morning someone will be full of iman and then by evening he will not, and vice versa. The problem with us parents in Canada is that the children are completely swallowed by iman and all the consumerism, materialism, the situation that we are all aware of. Is there a proof, a solid, tangible proof that scientifically, seeking knowledge you mentioned is a science? Is there a scientific proof? I'm coming from the famous documentary of Carl Sagan where the blue dot.
The blue dot?
The blue dot.
Okay.
Dark blue dot. It talks about the universe, the size of the enormity of the universe. The question that my children ask is, where is Allah? If we can basically point to them that here, this is Allah, then there is the chance of increasing the level of iman. They can feel the money, they can feel the new Tesla, they can feel the new iPhone and what have you, but they can't feel, like you said, that be proud of it. And for that, you have to have years of gaining knowledge. So if we can highlight how to deal with the new generation, the prodigies of us, the immigrants who came from another world, and what we see happen going forward. So if you can shed some light, I'll be good.
Okay, inshallah. So the question is about how do we raise the new generation that could be more materially oriented in terms of their pursuits, but also in terms of belief, that they believe certain things. I think also the sisters had some questions. Okay, whatever. Yeah, we'll come to you, inshallah. So, of course, you have to realize, for instance, when your children are growing up in a non-Muslim Western country as a minority, where that country is, as we said, and as you said, follows the general capitalist consumerist system, and is also part of the Enlightenment project, that is all about the here and now, and it's all about what I can see and what I can touch, right? So the way that you present Islam to them, the way that you teach them Islam is going to be slightly or significantly different than a person living or had grown up in a Muslim country, absorbing Islam from his parents and the people around. So of course, I mean, the teaching of Islam, first of all, needs to start very early. It cannot be delayed, so that they would absorb different or alien ideas that run contrary to Islam, and then when you want to start introducing Islam, their identity has already formed, or their thinking has already formed. So that's the first. The second also is, whenever you're going to be presenting Islam to kids growing up here, on Allahu A'lam, you need to be emphasizing two things. What is going to attract them to Islam? And second is the cause behind, or the reason behind whatever they are doing. So salah, why you pray; fasting, why you fast; go to the masjid, why you're going to the masjid. So the reasons need to be furnished and supplied, because once that happens, they'll understand the rationalism behind it, the reason why this needs to be done. In Muslim countries, you can be told to do something and you'll do it because everybody else is doing it. Here, that question of why I'm doing it always comes up, and you need to have the answer for why you're doing it. So justification needs to be given, and I term it in terms of wisdom. You need to explain the wisdom of the Sharia, or the secrets of the Sharia to them, to the best of your ability. If you cannot, you can consult with Shaykh or with an Imam to tell you these things. And also what is needed to be taught, which may not have been taught in Muslim countries, is the proofs for the existence of Allah Azza wa Jalla. So Aqeedah, when we teach them Aqeedah, and there are very different ways of teaching Aqeedah, but to teach them Aqeedah, and to begin with, why is Allah Azza wa Jalla existing? Why does He exist? What does it mean for Allah to be Rabb? And what does the Quran say about the existence of Allah Azza wa Jalla? Because the Quran does talk about it. So if we collect these proofs and we present it to them, especially at an early age, but it doesn't then matter what age they have reached, we present it to them, bi'idhnillah Azza wa Jalla, they'll see in it sufficient proofs that you don't need to say, I need to touch, or I need to see to believe in Allah Azza wa Jalla, but rather I can believe in the ghaib, because Allah Azza wa Jal had given us the ghaib right here, or evidence here, to show us what lies beyond our senses. And there's evidence, right, or parallels in science and in scientific thinking that, mirrors this. That even in science, when you're going to talk about theories or what have you, you don't always talk about what you see, but you extrapolate from it to guide your scientific inquiry. So, and there's more we can say about this, right now. For instance, something that comes to mind, that Allah Azza wa Jalla does highlight in the Quran, the attitude that says, I'll only see, or I'll only believe if I see. And that is the attitude of some of the people of the book. وَقَالُوا أَرِنَا اللَّهَ جَهْرًا. It says, let us see Allah Azza wa Jalla in plain sight. So this question was actually given to Prophet Musa alayhi salam. And Allah Azza wa Jalla considered that to be an affront, because Allah had given them sufficient proof. So you can see that there are different attitudes in the Quran, the attitude of the believers and the attitude of the non-believers. But if a person wants to believe, there are ways in the Quran to present that belief, where a person can say, I believe in Allah, though I haven't seen Him, though I have not talked to Him. Allahu Akbar. So, yeah.
What prompted you to talk about assimilation, since we live in Canada and it's a multicultural country versus the US or other countries?
Right.
You have that choice. So
Of course. There's always that choice, of course. But I'm describing tendencies. There's a tendency, for instance, within the West, right? Or within, actually, not even the West. I wouldn't even say the West. Global. I was going to say the global. That whenever you have a majority and a minority, that there's always be that pressure on that minority to somehow assimilate. Not that pressure sometimes is be explicit, and that pressure sometimes is not so explicit. But there is that pressure that you need to look like us and talk like us and behave like us. So I'm talking about it really in a more theoretical sense rather than just talking about it in a very specific locality. That the majority will have that assimilation pressure and the minority will have that imitation response to it as a possible response. But I recognize the difference between the US model, the Canadian model, and also the European model. Exactly. It's sisters here. In the front here. Front. Alaikum salam.
Now, if someone starts to practice later on in life, or if someone is a Muslim, what is your advice to them as they are through that Islamic identity? It can be a little bit overwhelming.
Yes.
And now that's my first question.
طيب.
The second question is, you said that teaching children Aqidah from the beginning. Are there specific resources that you advise us to use? Like very simple ones. Because sometimes simple can get the message across faster.
Right. Jazakallah. Okay, inshallah. So the first question, and it's an important question, Jazakallah khair. So whether it is a person who just accepted Islam or a person who just has returned to Islam, they're always Muslim but have returned to Islamic practice, what's the advice when it comes to developing this Islamic identity? Because as she said, and it's rightfully so, it could be very overwhelming when you want to do everything. And the simple advice there is gradualism. That you need to be gradual and take it in steps. And only build up towards an optimum Islamic practice and Islamic identity. So just like when there's a new Muslim and we tell them, you can't memorize the Fatiha today, right? But we need you to pray. Start praying. But when you're praying, just remember Allah Azza wa Jalla in your own language. So that allowance, right, that exemption, lets them pray immediately without being overwhelmed. But they can start praying immediately. So a person who is returning to Islam or just accepted Islam, we say, begin with the very basics. What are the basics of Islam? The basics of Salah, the basics of staying away from the haram, the basics of modesty, the very, very basics. And don't worry about everything else at this moment. Until you are solid, until you are confident, until you are strong. And especially if you have a mentor, okay, a sister or a brother or a sheikh, an imam, who continuously advises you, then that person will be able to say, well, now you can do this extra thing. Now you can memorize this extra thing. Now you can adopt this extra thing. And so you'll continue to build up this Islamic personality in a pace that's not going to overwhelm you and it's not going to burden you. So to be gradual, okay? And know that, and as the Prophet ﷺ says, إِنَّ هَذَا الدِّينَ مَتِينَ. This advice applies to everybody, by the way. When you're learning Islam as a new Muslim, returning Muslim, or a veteran in Islam, it doesn't matter. إِنَّ هَذَا الدِّينَ مَتِينَ. This religion is vast. So take it gently as you are learning it. Right? You will be completely overwhelmed by it if you want to learn everything and do everything. But take it in steps. Not too fast, but of course not too slow. But in a comfortable pace. Okay? So that answers that's the first question. The second question, I'm not aware of a book or a single book that will do what you have asked, which is like presented in a very simple, especially to children, you're saying, right? Aqidah. So I'm not aware of a particular book, right, that does that. So maybe, those who teach children or can answer this best. But I would say if a person is able to focus on how Allah Azza wa Jal talks about Himself in the Quran, especially Rububiyyah. The Rububiyyah is Lordship of Allah Azza wa Jal. That is the thing that will introduce that first point of Aqidah that the children will need. Like actually we need it. So when Allah Azza wa Jal wants to establish His dominance, His power, His knowledge to the non-believers, and He talks about the creation of the heavens and the earth. Did you create yourselves or did we create you? He asked them to look at the animals, at fire, at their progeny, at their ancestors. All of these are evidence of the existence of Allah Azza wa Jal, because the non-believers, they did not need convincing that Allah existed, but Allah was using this evidence to prove that He's the only one that should be worshipped. But we can take that to prove the existence and the presence of Allah Azza wa Jal, who holds up the sky, who holds up the earth in its place, cause and effect. So if you collect these ayahs and you present them to children and to ourselves through the Quran, I think some of that message is placed, or maybe all of it, inshallah, will be conveyed. But there's work that needs to be done in collecting all of this together and framing it in a way that will appeal to children and maybe also adults as well. A simple Aqidah book for adults that addresses these points as well, or just any book of Aqidah? Okay, any book of Aqidah. So I did recommend, and it's not a short book of Aqidah, but I did recommend previously because it's just easy. So Sheikh Omar al-Ashqar, he's a Jordanian scholar who had passed away, and he has a series on Aqidah. It's called Al-Aqidah Fillah. And so it talks about belief in Allah, talks about belief in the angels, in the prophets, in the book, in the day of judgment, and Qada and Qadar. So it's like the pillars of Iman. And it's available in English. So each one is one volume. And it's sufficient, inshallah, to be, it's easy enough, but sufficient, inshallah, to furnish the basics for an average Muslim and even beyond. So if you're able to locate that in Arabic, if you can, but they're available in English as well, that would be a very good start, inshallah. Oh no, it's a different book. So that book of Iman is from Sahih al-Bukhari, and it does not really address the things that we are talking about. So it's not a book of Aqidah where it's teaching you the basics of Aqidah, but it talks about Iman as Iman. Okay, what does it mean? The branches of Iman, that it increases and decreases. So it could help, but it's not a comprehensive study of Aqidah. No. So there's a question over here. Not a question, I'm sorry. Okay. Uh-huh. It's called what again? Free Quran Education, a YouTube series, right? Okay. And this is for kids or kids and all? It could be for both. Okay. 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 It's animated, so it's interesting. Oh, okay, I get it. I get it. Okay, I get it. Jazakumullah khair. Alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. Wa iyaakum wa barak feek.
Question, how do you deal with the notion of learning should be fun? Like it's part of the tourism is everything is funny and should be entertaining, and sometimes I feel undegrading sometimes.
Right.
How are you gonna make the Aqidah fun? I mean, you sit and you need a little discipline and be patient to learn. How to deal with this contradiction?
Right. Jazakallah khair. So I mean, I don't know if you've heard it, but he says the notion that learning should be fun, and he says, can every learning be fun? And how do you teach Aqidah and make it fun at the same time? And that's the dilemma of every educator. I don't know how many educators we have here. Do we have some, right? So that's the dilemma of every educator, that you're supposed to be at the same time an entertainer. And if you're not entertaining enough, they're not interested in what you have to say, and they'd rather spend time on the phone rather than listening to you. So that becomes really the challenge of every single educator. And I think maybe to a degree a balance could be struck, but only to a degree, where at least as an introduction, you want to grab a person's attention, you want to bring them in. At least as an introduction, you can make learning fun. You can make it interesting. You can make it exciting, right? You can. But up to a degree, and after that, you need discipline, right? So, especially when the subject matter is serious and requires concentration. So you need discipline, and as you said exactly, there is a dignity that's supposed to be given to pursuing knowledge. I mean, chemistry, physics, and whatever, right? That's different. These are worldly pursuits and they need a degree of seriousness. But when it comes to listening to what Allah has said and understanding what the Prophet ﷺ has said, a sense of dignity is required in attaining that knowledge. So up to a degree, yes. If you're teaching really young kids, yes. But you got to reach a point where you say to yourself and you say to your students, really, this is serious and it needs to be taken seriously. Now, it could be made interesting, not fun, but interesting by posing questions, by having them do their own research, by coming back and discussing, the results of those research. So there are different methods of instruction rather than just giving lectures, right? And we can sometimes give lectures at times, or leave lecture giving or the more dull methods of teaching to the more dedicated students. But there are more methods of teaching that could help us, inshallah, communicate our message at least to the average person, but without, degrading, as you said, the message itself. Yeah.
The question is, if you can elaborate a little bit about pragmatic. When you say, this identity is pragmatic. In general, the view of pragmatism is like utilitarian.
Yeah.
So, can you just elaborate a little bit?
Yeah. So it's not pragmatic, meaning that sacrifice everything for the sake of the end, right? That's not the pragmatism that we're talking about. The pragmatism that we talked about should be understood also in terms of, said, stable but pragmatic, right? So we said that there is a sense of stability to it, but at the same time, it does respond to your needs. It does respond, for instance, to the strength that you have, to the level of knowledge that a person has, where he is and what is asked of him or not. So it's not that a person who is living or practicing Islam, for instance, in a Muslim majority countries, where he's comfortable or she's comfortable doing everything Islamically, they may not be able to do everything, for instance, in another place that oppresses Muslims. So where that place oppresses Muslims, they may have to hide their Islam, or they may have not to announce their Islam, or shave their beard, or in some extreme cases, take off their hijab, just to save themselves and save their families. So we say it's pragmatic, meaning that it does and it can shift within, right, basics, right? But it can shift to accommodate the place and accommodate the time, but of course without compromising those principles. So in a place, for instance, where it's a Western country, right, you're not asked all the time to live exactly like Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was living in Medina, right? There are differences, right? Now, where do these differences exist? That's a topic for another time and a different place, right? And it depends on the pressure and what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. But it tells you that as Islam is fit for every time and every place, it also allows you to live in every time and in every place, right? Without putting undue burden on you. That's what I mean. So let me see if I can read this. One of the negative effects of social media, cell phones, is that it has made infidelity easy, and simultaneously some husbands lack ghira and are deceived, all of which increases fasad. What does Islam say about such husband and such woman, kind of thing? Okay, so what I understand is that social media had made infidelity easy, right? So men and women could communicate incognito sometimes without anybody watching them, and that could lead to actual infidelity, right? To committing zina and betraying the confidence of your spouse. So what does Islam say about this and about that? And of course it's prohibited that if this woman is not your wife, she's not your sister, she's not a mahram of yours, why are you talking to her? Right? And if this man is not related to you, he's not a mahram of yours, why are you talking to him? Even online. And why are you leaving him comment, oh, I love you, or oh, I love what you've said? No, you should not speak in a way that would entice, that would attract, whether you are male or female. And know that sometimes, even that emojicons that you put, right? Sometimes because you're a female and you have put that to a male, or a male had put that to a female, just the male psyche or the female psyche receiving it from the opposite sex, you'll start wondering, oh, does she love me? She likes me. He likes me. That's the door from which the shaitan enters. So you really got to be reserved when it comes to interacting with the opposite sex, even online, even with social media. So it's not only when I meet them in the masjid, but also when I'm outside. If I don't need to talk to them, I shouldn't be. Especially messaging. If I don't need to be commenting on this, I shouldn't be. Or if I want to put a comment that is public, that is very dignified, and everybody can see it, he cannot misconstrue it as being anything else. To keep it always Islamic with Assalamu alaikum, may Allah reward you, inshallah, this and that, to keep Allah Azza wa Jal in the midst so that it remains halal. Right? So even the best of things can be corrupted when we allow the shaitan to enter. Wallahu a'lam. Alaikum salam.
You mentioned a hadith, whether Islam or Al-Qariba, Islam means extreme. I've gone to this hadith in reference to a different point. Could you please explain with respect to Islamic identity?
Repeat that.
Can you please elaborate in details what does this hadith reference to Islamic identity?
Okay. So the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, when he says Bada al-Islamu ghariba, so Islam started a stranger. That is, when the Prophet ﷺ started his da'wah, he was alone. Right? And Abu Bakr accepted Islam, Khadija accepted Islam, Ali, Zayd, they accepted Islam, they were alone. So salah was very strange. Now worshipping the idols was very strange. Staying away from alcohol was very strange. Staying away from other vices are very strange. So it started strange, and actually every Islam, every da'wah that starts as strange, is that you are going to stand out when you are Muslim. And sometimes more than others, in some places more than others. So he said now, when the Prophet ﷺ had said that hadith, he said at this moment when he spoke it, it was not a stranger anymore. There were a lot of Muslims. So Islamic practice was not peculiar, was not strange. And Islamic beliefs were not peculiar and strange. But he said it was going to come back to being strange. So it's going to come back to being strange at the end of time. But there's also relative strangeness, let's call it. Yeah, sure. Where in some places and times, the practice of Islam or the presence of Muslim dwindles. It goes down. So the one who says La ilaha illallah is going to stand out. The one who says Muhammad Rasulullah is going to stand out. The one who prays, the one who stays away from haram is going to stand out. And you probably have experienced some of that in your workplace, among other people. When you say, I can't eat this, you'll be the only person who's saying, I can't eat this. I can't drink that, you're the only person who's saying this. I need to pray, you're the only person who's saying that. That's ghurba. That's being a stranger. So the Prophet ﷺ says, Tuba to you. Tuba to you means heaven to you. And when you decide to adhere to it and practice it despite being alone, Jannah will be yours. Because there's ease in doing it in a group. When everybody's praying, that's why it's easier to be a Muslim in a Muslim country, right? Because everybody's doing it as long as actually they're doing it. But anyway, so when you're alone, that's the sacrifice and that's the practice. So the Prophet made dua. So that's what I'm saying. When you find yourself alone, practicing Islam or asking or pursuing Islamic practice, remember that you actually are not alone. Because who's with you? Who's with you? Allah Azza wa Jal. Remember that Allah Azza wa Jal is with you so that He can pave and ease everything if He wants it. So you really are not alone. And then remember the long tradition of all the prophets of Allah Azza wa Jal and all those who believed in Him, who sacrificed at the beginning. See, if you hold on to your Islam, Allah could reward you for that particular act that you're doing more than many other Muslims for comfortably practicing Islam among and around other Muslims. So that's the part that you, inshallah. Okay, let me see. Why Islamic schools are so expensive? I don't know. More Muslims would send their kids to the Islamic school if they are affordable. You need to ask them. I think that they do actually have a lot of expenses paying teachers, and I'm not even sure that the teachers are well paid in Islamic schools. So But yeah, I understand it being a problem, and I know that some people resort to homeschooling as a result. But yeah, that I can't answer this. I don't know what to say about it. Of course, it's all private. There's no government funding, of course. So it can sometimes be challenging to maintain Islamic identity when it is developed. I often come across questions from Muslims not practicing enough. This is too much all the time, going to halaqas and staying in the masjid often. How will you respond to this? Well, I mean, you don't need to be like a super hyper Muslim, right, for you to have an Islamic identity. You just need to have the basics. That's what we talked about. Just have the basics. So the Prophet ﷺ, through his da'wah, recognized that people exist at different levels. And so there is, at the bottom level, there is this Arabi that comes to the Prophet ﷺ in the hadith. How many salahs do I have to pray? 5 salahs. Are these the only obligation? Yes. By Allah, I'm not going to do any more. Fasting, tells him about Ramadan. Anything else? By Allah, nothing more. So he tells him about these pillars. And then he leaves. And he's the Prophet ﷺ, he says he will succeed if he's honest. Meaning that I'll do this and nothing more, but nothing less. He said he has succeeded if he has done this. So we understand that there is this level of basic Islamic observance. That's the thing that we need not compromise. We cannot compromise. Of course, it's not just simply that. You're going to stay away from the basic haram. And stay away also from, stay away from the basic haram and do the basic obligations. This is what is needed from you. If this is your level, that's it. You don't need to go to all the halaqas. You still need to come to Friday if you're a man. You don't need to come to all the lectures. You don't need to read the Quran every single day and memorize. You don't need to do this if it's not within your capacity. But, okay, can you maintain your iman without doing these things? If you're living in a Muslim, not even Muslim, I want to even say that. Today, in today's world, right, with all the other influences and hitting you right and left, inviting you to what displeases Allah Azza wa Jalla, can you maintain an Islamic course without some other influences, Islamic influences to give you strength? So that's where it comes from. I know it's hard, right, for some people, but at a minimum now, because of where we're living, because of the world that we're living in today, because that Bedouin, that nomadic man, could live and be with his sheep, with his camel, there is no haram that he's going to see. It's just his salah and his fasting, and that's it. There's no other haram that he's going to see. But you're seeing haram every single day, multiple times, not by intention, but as soon as you step out, or you turn on your TV, or you look out into your phone, you're going to see that haram. So you need the counterbalance. So you need that Quran, and you need the halaqah, and you need to energize your iman, enliven your iman for you to be able to keep practicing. So it's a lot. Well, ask Allah Azza wa Jal not to make it so hard on you. You see, Allah Azza wa Jal, I'm finding it. Again, someone came to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. See, that's the beauty of it. I'm just going to tell you, just read hadith, read Quran. Because sometimes one hadith will come and answer a question of yours that you did not have then, but now you have. So didn't one man come to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and he said, Ya Rasulullah, O Messenger of Allah, Inna shara'i al-Islami qad kathurat alay. He says, the commands of Islam are too much for me. So advise me to do one thing that I can hold on to. What did he say? You know it. I know you know it. What did he say? No. He said, advise me to do one thing. Inna shara'i al-Islami qad kathurat alay, fa akhbirni bi amrin atamassaku bih. Not praying. La yazalu lisanuka ratban min dhikrillah. Continue to do dhikr of Allah Azza wa Jal. So here's a person who came and said, it's too much for me. He says, okay, you want one thing? He asked for one thing. Let's just me hold to on one thing that will give me that strength or will help me. Because I can learn about all of this. He says, continue to remember Allah. Verbatim. Let your tongue always be wet with remembering Allah Azza wa Jalla. Meaning always moving. So that's one thing. It's too much, at least hold on to this. Okay, assalamu alaikum. But at least be true and hold on to this. Because what's going to happen is that if you keep remembering Allah, honestly remembering Allah, you will find the strength to do these other things. So that's how you find that fuel, that energy.
I have a comment.
Please.
Over the last 8 or more, that it's more about choice, not the influences from the society to conform to the norms and values. Specifically for people from our community background, when we get together, it's a disaster. I want to talk about my own experience. My
Yes.
kids were in a public school, and I did not, the Canadians, the Muslims were all, we followed the same rules: no birthdays, no sleepovers, no this, no nothing. Everything was good because my kids, they knew their limits. They knew that we were different, they were different.
Uh-huh.
We're not fundamentalist or extreme or anything,
Yeah.
in the middle, we can.
Right.
Anyways, it's only they became somehow, they deviated when they connected with people from our own community. So my observation, not only about my kids, with others, is that choices. It's easier to do what you want, what you have a tendency, to do it, because we live in a liberal country, right?
Yeah.
So you use the freedom, blah, blah, blah. But it's not the pressure from the society or the system or anything, not at all.
Mm-hmm.
It's the choices.
Right. So you see, but within the community itself,
Yes.
right? That okay.
Yes.
Exactly. Okay. There's here, how do we stop our children from participating in non-Muslim festivals, or should they participate in them, and how would it impact the Muslim identity? Right. So you want to teach them, inshallah, early on, and that's why also you need to make Islamic festivals as attractive as possible, as fun as possible, that they become an event that they look forward to. So you have to teach them early on, as the sister was saying, that we're different. And so these festivals don't really fit who we are. And festivals are the greatest marker that distinguish people. I mean, whenever you go to a society, if you want to understand that society, look at what they're celebrating. You'll understand who the society is and what they value. So non-Muslim festivals, right, there's a problem with a lot of non-Muslim festivals because they do have a religious component to them, okay? Because the world up until recently was religious. And so it influences a lot of festivals. So we have to tell them from an early age that yes, other people celebrate this, but we have our own. So let's invest time and effort and emotions in celebrating our own festivals. Will it influence their identity? To a degree, it will influence their identity. To what degree, it depends on if they participate, it will influence their identity. But to what degree, it depends on how much they participate and what these festivals are and how young they are and how does it sculpt their own understanding of who they are. So the safest, we'll say that grow and improve our Islamic festivals, make them fun, make them as big as possible, so that once the person enjoys all of that, they find in them no need to yearn towards anything else. Like, why is it that they look at other festivals and they crave them? Other than the fact that they are everywhere, they're attractive. They're about presence and lights and music and fun. So why not also we endow our own festivals with the halal part of it and make it as fun as possible so they can say, yes, I'm not celebrating this because I don't need to, because I have my Eid that is waiting for me. Wallahu a'lam. Yes. Oh, sorry, you're there.
So I have this comment about making learning more consistent or more fun. I think analogies are very helpful in that, making analogies to real life things.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the theoretical stuff, a lot of this stuff is very hard to conceptualize and to internalize and to learn. So making analogies to real life is really helpful, and I think it's helpful for kids as well.
Okay, so using analogies to make education more interesting, right? Yeah, inshallah. Alaikum salam.
Maybe you talk about the sukkah.
I, okay, okay. There's someone here, your sister over there. Alaikum salam.
I have attended parenting course for Imam that stayed here. It was very informative, and he gave us a simple rule. It's called the rule of 777. So the 7 years of the child life, you nurture them like emotionally, and then the second 7 years, you tell them what is halal and what is haram, and then the last 7 years, you just correct them and guide them.
Jazakallah. Inshallah. Okay. Yeah, if we're done. Okay, there's one over there. Alaikum salam.
So I'm a teacher in Islamic school, and I've been staying in Islamic schools for a few years. And I haven't applied for the public because I'm just, I think the Islamic atmosphere is more comfortable for wearing a hijab, for doing my salah. I don't know if these are logical reasons. Like, I feel like if I were to go forward, because I grew up in Canada as well, so it's sort of like I'm staying in Islamic school so that I can keep, you can say, my Islamic identity, so I can do my salah and all that. But some of my relatives are like, oh, we should go to the board, to public schools, because it's better pay, etc., etc. So basically, if you're a teacher in Islamic school, you're willing to prepare for the sake of Allah, right? And as opposed to getting better pay. But I don't know if I should move on.
Okay. That's difficult to answer, right? What I can say is that it does make sense. The choice that you talk about does make sense that if you're within an Islamic context, you're better able to practice, and maybe your practice not only is going to be preserved, but maybe possibly enhanced because of the presence, because of other Muslims around you, because there's that Islamic reminder all the time, minus the challenge that may exist to your practice, if it exists, to your practice and to your creed once you step outside. So it would, I understand the choice, and it's a commendable choice, and it does include sacrifice, and if a person sacrifices Allah Azza wa Jal, then Allah will compensate them bi'idhnillah Azza wa Jal, at least in the hereafter, but maybe in this dunya as well. But whether a person can make that move and what happens when they make that move, exists beyond my expertise. Okay.
I have probably about 70 people reporting to me in the IT arena. Most of them are belonging to another religion, and they are celebrating Diwali. What should be because I'm bombarded with their congratulations on Diwali. How should I respond?
Oh.
Diwali is
The Hindu festival, right? So this is the case with every non-Muslim celebration, right? When somebody congratulates you. Yeah, and it's easier if it's Christmas and stuff like that, because you can say happy holidays with the intention of that break. May you just have a nice break, right? So you're not really congratulating them for that particular festival, right, and celebration. So happy holidays covers everything and you're fine. When it comes to a specific festival like that, you can't really respond back by saying, and a happy festival to you, right? Because of what they're celebrating, but it does not really stop you from being nice and kind to them and just making dua to them. May God bless you, may God, give you health and your children. Somebody just asked me this morning actually. So you can make dua for a non-believer, for Allah Azza wa Jal to give them, if they deserve it, if they are nice people, long life, healthy children, increase their wealth, So you're being kind by saying all of these things, and you can figure out a way to say it that is going to be very attractive. And at the same time, you're really not engaging into a celebration of that festival by naming it in itself. So I hope that, inshallah, helps. So you just make dua for them. May you encounter this in your life. May you find ease. May you find this and may that. They'll understand that you have good feelings towards them, but that your religion may stop you from congratulating them because of it. Wallahu alam. Sheikh Abdullah, you want to add anything? I see you sitting there, so طيب إن شاء الله. وإياكم بارك الله. Okay. So, any more questions, or we all can go home? We have more. Okay. Inshallah. You can't go yet. Okay.
Sometimes I think in order to maintain Islamic identity, I don't know about others, but sometimes I kind of keep to myself because I don't want to have, for example, relatives or maybe friends. But sometimes relatives feel like they may have a kind of negative impact on my own practice. So I kind of keep myself away. Is that okay? Or is it better, would I be a stronger person if I were to, see them more often and kind of deal with it?
Right.
This dilemma.
Okay, good. So, is it better if you have relatives that are a bad influence? Is it better to stay away from them so that you keep yourself safe, or interact with them and simply just deal with that? And Islam, and this is part of also the vast encompassing array of Islamic practices, is that it does allow this and it does allow that, but based on you. So if a person is not strong enough to be able to deal with the outside world or with those relatives and still maintain their Islam, and rather than influencing them, he or she are going to be influenced by them, they're allowed to stay away from it, even if sometimes they are relatives. Now, you don't want to cut them off completely. You want to maintain some kind of connection where at least a phone call or at least a Eid visit or whatever, at least is not going to sever all types of connections. But if you need to stay away just to keep yourself safe, because you say to yourself, I can't change them. I'm too weak. They'll change me. Then you need to stay back. But if you're strong enough, this is exactly like da'wah. You're strong enough that you can go there and you be the one who's changing them, not them you, then it's better for you to go ahead and change them. So it depends on how strong they are in their influence and how strong you are in your practice. Alaikum salam. Right. Right.
So it's better to be mainstream and then, and she said you are teaching everyone, it's saying a single word of Islam.
Right.
So, and that did happen. One time I was teaching, I was doing a craft with my kids, and one of them asked, the girl asked, why are you wearing hijab? Why are you never seeing it? And the little boy, he said, no, because I like her like that, and that's her choice. And another girl said, no, my mom says that this
Mm-hmm.
It's like, it's becoming, like, when I shared that experience with my friend, and she said, you know what, look at that. When they're going to grow up, and their, colleague is wearing hijab, they won't ask her, they won't even bother, they won't even come to this. Like, have that why she's wearing.
Mm-hmm.
They are accustomed to it.
Right, right.
So I feel like, it's okay.
Yeah. Right. I mean, both are options, but it ultimately has to come to the person, right, themselves. Because before you can fix others, you have to be careful not to undermine your own self. But if you're strong enough that you can say, I can go outside, not change here, but change over there, then yes. Jazakallah. I don't see any more hands up, so I'm just going to conclude, I think. طيب جزاكم الله خيرا سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك الحمد لله